Roughly a century ago, in the heat of World War I, the Germans devised a plan to eliminate the Russians from the fight. The German High Command loaded a secret weapon onto a sealed train headed for enemy territory. Winston Churchill once described that cargo as a plague bacillus, and it promised to destroy Russia from within. That weapon was Vladimir Lenin and his unlikely band of ragtag revolutionaries. Their story sits at the heart of Lenin on the Train by Catherine Merridale, which covers the ensuing civil war and how it fundamentally changed Russia. My name is Shirvan and welcome to a review for the bookshelf. Merridale is one of the leading non-Russian writers on Russian history. Her previous work includes Ivan's War, which gives a glimpse into the daily routines of the soldiers of the Red Army during World War II, and Red Fortress, which focuses on the history of the Kremlin. In her latter book, Merridale was even awarded the Pushkin House Book Prize. Her latest book, Lenin on the Train, is a reconstruction of the Bolshevik leaders' desperate attempt to return home. But it's not just about Lenin's journey to Russia. In fact, there is barely any mention of Lenin in the first quarter of the book. Instead, in the early chapters, Merridale spends a great deal of effort to explain the social constructs of Russia at the turn of the century. Ever since Russian officers were exposed to the social-political designs of Europe during the Napoleonic Wars, Russians had grown resentful of the ruling nobility. By the 19th century, it was apparent that serfdom in their country was at odds with the values and liberties of European civilization, and although the Tsars had abolished serfdom in the mid-19th century, it was too little too late. Following these affairs, Russia embarked on a phase of industrialization in which the newly liberated peasants moved to the larger cities where they worked in the factories. The rapid turn of events raised social tensions. The gap between the haves and have-nots grew, and the Russian imperial system cracked under its own weight. Soon, reactionary groups emerged. Protests erupted in the streets of the capital, and students formed revolutionary movements that attempted to assassinate the Tsars. People wanted change, and Russia was imploding. The Tsars tried to resolve the situation and formed a secret police that hunted down political dissidents. But every time the government struck down a revolutionary, two more emerged. In 1887, the secret police detained and executed 5 dissidents who had plotted to execute the Tsar. Among the executed was the older brother of Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, who would later be known as Lenin. The death of his brother deeply scarred the young and bright Vladimir. He became radicalized. He got involved in student protests and started writing social literature. Eventually, the once promising Vladimir was detained and sent to Siberia for 3 years. After his term ended in 1900, he moved to West Europe, where he continued his work. It was during this time that Vladimir adopted the nickname Lenin and became one of the leading political figures that advocated for a communist takeover of Russia. However, from the start, Russian communists had been split into 2 camps. There was Lenin's majority, or Bolsheviks, who advocated for a militant approach, and there was the minority, or Mensheviks, who argued for socialism within democracy. Here, Merridale does an outstanding job in explaining the ideological disputes between the 2 camps, as well as the relationship between Lenin and Trotsky. The Bolshevik moment of truth eventually came in 1914 when World War I broke out. The war turned out to be a disaster for Russia. Of its 12 million soldiers, 3 out of 4 died. Meanwhile, in the Russian capital, famine and deteriorating working conditions led to even greater social tensions. By July 1916, Lenin's mother had passed away. Her death deeply hurt him, and Lenin came to question his own mortality. He knew that the Russian working class was on the verge of a revolution, but he also feared that he would not live long enough to see it. So, for Lenin, the proletarian uprising could not come soon enough. Eventually, in February 1917, the situation reached its tipping point in the Russian capital. Widespread famine forced 250,000 people to the streets demanding peace and bread. The government deployed soldiers to disperse the protesters, and the ensuing contact resulted in a massacre. However, as the soldiers withdrew to their barracks, they started to question the morality of the orders they had received. So the next day, the soldiers mutinied and took on scarlet red ribbons and joined their fellow countrymen in protest against the government. This is by far my favorite chapter in the book because it reads like a political thriller, and Merridale writes with such fluency that it sets an ambience of uncertainty. Sometimes one feels sympathy for Lenin and his cause, in other times he is portrayed as rotten to the core. This shuffle between good and bad may come as confusing for some readers, but it's an accurate reflection of the uncertainty of those times. But the core of the book focuses on the events that came next. As unrest spread to other areas, the Tsar abdicated from the throne, which forced the State Duma to form a provisional government and take control of the country. Upon learning the news, Lenin decided to return home and take charge of the uprising. However, the direct passages from Germany to Russia were blocked due to the ongoing war. As a result, Lenin conspired with the German High Command and negotiated a passage through enemy territory. In a sealed train, Lenin and his companions traveled from Switzerland to Germany, to Sweden, and across Finland to Petrograd in Russia. It was the calm before the storm. For the purpose of research, Merridale took the same train journey Lenin did. Unfortunately, the author's journey has little impact on the book. This is a missed opportunity. She could have at least compared the modern situation to the past, which would have only enhanced the reader experience. That said, the author makes up for it by vividly describing the German-Russian status quo. For Lenin, the journey was a gamble. He didn't know if he was going to be welcomed with open arms or hanged for treason, especially since his opponents tried to discredit him as a traitor. For the Germans, it was a wager as well. The German High Command had hoped that Lenin's presence in Russia would knock the Russians out of the war and allow for Germany to focus on the West European front line. This was such a controversial point in history that for decades Soviet officials denied Lenin's collusion with the Germans. Anyone who argued differently would have a long talk with the KGB. So reading or owning books such as Lenin on the Train was a death sentence in the Soviet Union. In any case, the German plan succeeded. As Lenin arrived in Russia, he was greeted by an old friend, Trotsky, who had been quietly amassing an intelligence network and a stockpile of weapons for the Scarlet Red Ribbon mutineers, which would be reinvented as the Red Army. Lenin's personality captured the imagination of the masses. He turned an angry mob into a militia that conquered an empire and created the world's first communist state. Once in power, Lenin proved to be a relentless tyrant who advocated for radical ideas by means of violence. Like pawns in a game of chess, he sacrificed millions of lives and called for mass terror to secure his objectives. Lenin's ruthless tactics soon turned into a nightmare for the Germans and the rest of Europe. In general, Lenin on the Train shows in detail how ordinary folk, when pushed against the wall, turn to desperate measures to survive. It is almost like a study of political radicalization and what impact famine and war have on the human condition. The book is also a leap in time to one of the most intriguing moments in Russian history. In addition to Lenin, we also get to read about larger-than-life characters such as Trotsky, Stalin, Kalinin, Rasputin, Kerensky, the Romanovs, and many more. If you are a fan of history, Lenin on the Train is a must-have, especially considering the 100th year anniversary of the Russian Revolution. Now, if you want to purchase the book, use our Amazon affiliate link in the description. It's not going to cost you extra, but we'll earn some revenues that will help support our channel. This was a Caspian Report review for The Bookshelf. Special thanks to our contributors on Patreon for making this report possible. If you're interested in learning more about our crowdfunding platform, visit patreon.com/CaspianReport. We have some great perks for our members, such as poll votes, PDF files, etc. Anyway, thank you for your time, take care, and Sarol.